hear them in order here. So we're going to open with Ethel Longscott. Ethel is an executive director for many, many years of the Women's Economic Agenda Project here in Oakland. She's recognized nationally as a fighter, strategist, and thinker in the fight for a cooperative society. Steve Miller is an Oakland high school science teacher. He's retired, was a pirate radio station operator and author of many articles on the economy, science, water, and the US political process. Gloria Meneses Sandoval is the editorial board member for the Tribuno del Pueblo. She's a retired high school counselor, lives in the California Central Valley, and was the first woman chair of MECHA UCLA chapter in 1972. Jerome Scott is a former member of the League of Revolutionary Black Workers and a founding director of Project South, the Institute for the Elimination of Poverty and Genocide. Adam Gottlieb will be with us, Chicago-born and raised. He's a poet, a songwriter, an educator, and an organizer. And last but certainly not least, Jack Hirschman, one of America's finest poets, 2006 Poet Laureate of the city of San Francisco. He writes and distributes widely for the People's Tribune, and he is a painter, translator, political activist, and all-around speaker. So without further ado, I'm going to turn now to the tech team to help us negotiate, and we will be coming back before the question and answer period to review these things. But just so you know, some technical details to start out. Kenny?
Yeah, thank you, Joyce. Hello, everyone. Please know we will be recording and going on to live stream. So we're live streaming to Facebook right now. So if you don't want your picture or your full name showing on the screen, make those adjustments now. Also, you can do that down in the left-hand corner of your screen where you see stop video. And if you hover over your name and the participants, you can click more and rename yourself. Everyone will be muted, and we will have a question and answer portion at the end where we will take questions in the stack, or you can raise your hand in the participants window. If you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out to anybody with the name Tech, where we can help you out technically. All right, back to you, Joyce.
Okay, so we're going to start with Ethel Longscott. Ethel?
All right, welcome to everybody. It's a great time, and a special shout out from Oaktown here in California. The importance of this moment in history is what we're going to be covering today. And as we convene only days away from the November 3rd elections, and in a time of social upheaval and social revolution, the working class is learning of the power it has when it acts in unity as a social force. Whether demonstrating peaceably or braving violent assaults by legal and extra-legal forces, this year the working class is functioning as a social force, demanding that the government provide for people's needs, not the wants of corporations. The common thread running through all the different struggles is a working class awakening to the power it has as a class to reconstruct society in the battle for basic needs and in the fight for racial justice and in the fight to save this planet. This year's electoral arena has been an important battlefield in the fight for class power and in ending racial capitalism and in defense of democracy. The overriding issue in this election is the future of our democracy. With all of the life and death implications for workers fighting for their basic needs. It will be impossible for the millions of Americans discarded by COVID-19 economy to obtain the food, water, housing, healthcare, and education necessary as long as the Trump administration is in power. And it may be impossible to get the Trump clique out of power if it is not thrown out next month. Many have pointed out correctly that this is the most important American election since 1860. The tyranny of white supremacy and Jim Crow politics, while deadly against Blacks, throws chains around the American working class, white, Black, brown, queer, or straight. The voter suppression once reserved for Blacks is now being used to disenfranchise everyone that corporate private property interests consider expendable. Hence, no pandemic relief, sisters and brothers. So when we ask ourselves which way forward in these revolutionary times, do we work to unite like-minded people, many of those of ourselves on the left, versus building unity between the sea of humanity who must fight in order to keep a roof over their heads in order to live? Trump's election in 2016 unleashed some of the most dangerous and vile anti-democratic characters, really a recipe for a fascist social base. In response, people are becoming more aware that their different demands spring from common interests, common needs and interests. The protests against George Floyd's murder led to using the election to the elections to raise the demands of a new class. The people being kicked to the curb because their labor is no longer needed. There is greater discussion of whose interests the government should serve, public good or private property, corporate private property. As in the last gilded age of the 1920s and 30s, there is renewed discussion of the need for socialism. There is also talk of the need to form a third party. The response of workers is also on a moral level in defense of democracy and human rights. We know that capitalism is dying. The fundamental force killing capitalism is the antagonism between labor replacing technology and an economic system based on private corporate property. This contradiction has created this new class and a growing sections of workers whose labor is no longer needed. The ruling class simply will not provide for workers it doesn't need. Meanwhile, the effort to impose a formal and legal fascism, the merger of the state and corporations, is racing forward. How do the moral survival and survival questions correlate and relate to political questions? Well, we are encouraged by the actions of tens of millions sending the message they want change. Many were involved in this kind of protest for the first time this year. Today, as we speak, some 52 million Americans have already voted. Who ever heard of that in America? Young people have been marching nationwide against police terror and are taking the lead for gun safety. Today's youth have a good reason to want a radical change. They have grown up understanding the power and the potential of digital technologies. They also have grown up in an economy that clearly doesn't want them. The rulers seek to shut down any and all dissent. The youth, who were the majority of the George Floyd protesters, are ready for change. A St. Louis teen by the name of Breonna Chandler recently told the New York Times, quote, "The more popular elder activists are reformists. My generation is calling for abolition rather than reform," close quote. The growing wave of resistance to Trump's fascist policies is also a wave of resistance to the status quo. At the core of Trump's resistance are basic needs issues. Our youth consistently show they understand the connection. Black Lives Matter's protests compared testimonials of parents being profiled by police to stories of parents being threatened with eviction in the pandemic. Increasingly, workers are formulating demands against corporate interests, police tyranny, the growing corporate threat to climate change. They protest in defense of democracy and human rights, and again, in opposition to fascism. There is a core of emerging new leaders who are running for office at the local, state, and national levels. Many of them are ordinary workers pushed into motion by the conditions the workers face. So this social revolution is slowly elevating the political question of power. Fascism and the threat of corporate power. Everything is fracturing based on the changes in the economy. The polarity is expressing itself internationally and nationally within social classes and within political parties. Both the Democrat and Republican parties are polarizing, fracturing, and the moment is analogous to the party splits that took place in the pre-Civil War period. Ultimately, workers cannot resolve their problems through the electoral process in a system where corporations are the rulers. On the other hand, the workers are using the electoral process in an attempt to get the government to address their needs. There are real things to be won or lost in these elections, and the possibilities of a third party is indispensable to this revolutionary process. It will serve to further develop the consciousness of how separate the interests of the masses of American people are from corporate interests. It is a necessary and inevitable step towards political, i.e., class consciousness. So why the League? Why a revolutionary organization? Well, the League the League of Revolutionaries for a New America, fights shoulder to shoulder with all those who are putting forward the demands of the new class in this current struggle, both at the ballot box and in the streets. Lerner works to build unity amongst revolutionaries, and my colleague later will talk about more particular expressions of that. But I want to drill down on this question of this moment in history and the importance of this electoral battles. Voter suppression, misinformation, and disinformation, generally the preparation to steal the election is underway as we speak. That is why today voting is one part of the resistance. Donald Trump has made it clear his determination to cling to office regardless of election results. And there's no sign from the leading Democrats that they're going to put up a fight. We will not forget the lessons from Florida 2000, when Al Gore and the Democratic Party leadership handed George Bush the presidency by their faith in the courts, in the legal process. My sisters and brothers, today we say instead we need to support every mobilization, demanding that every vote be counted. There should be no business as usual if the will of the people is ignored. Right now, it means voting against Trump and yes, for Biden, and defeating Trump's attempts to steal the election or refuse to leave office. This, my friends, is a tactic, not an endorsement of either Biden or the Democratic Party. Ruling class fascists will continue to attack. Some of them will be Democrats. The work of Lerner is to politicize each moment of resistance. The class interest cannot be sustained without class consciousness and indeed organization. As I close, where do we go from here? It's not always articulated, but letting people thrive in a laborless economy will require public control and ownership of our resources in a society organized on a cooperative basis. A radical reconstruction of the economy and the society, a transformation of this failed economy and this failed state. In short, a political revolution. White supremacy has been baked into capitalism since its inception of this country. It cannot be stopped without abolishing private corporate property. When Bernie Sanders talked about the need for a political revolution, he wasn't wrong. Corporate private property in these laborless economy is absolutely antagonistic to democracy. They cannot coexist, and one will inevitably destroy the other. Defeating fascism requires a class strategy and a plan. Onward, not one step backward. Thank you.
Thank you, Ethel. Yes, so we're going to move on to Steve Miller, and I just want to remind speakers, we're trying to stay to 7 minutes. Thank you so much, Ethel. And Steve Miller, go ahead.
First of all, welcome everybody. And for full disclosure, I am not the Steve Miller who is in the White House, and hopefully you will see why after we talk a bit. We have it in our power to begin the world anew. Tom Paine wrote those words just before the revolution of 1776. By the word we, he meant the people, the common people, the public, all of us, the real inclusive breadth of humanity, basically every human being. That statement is also true today. We do have it in our power to begin the world anew. We have the numbers, the massive social force of millions of people who are facing a hostile and predatory system. We know how to plan and govern for our own benefit, and we know what we need, that everyone has open access to every necessity of life. The key question is, how can we begin the world anew? That's a big strategic issue that everybody should be talking about. America is facing a desperate crisis, profound economic collapse, a pandemic that's completely out of control, and shockingly little government support for people. The federal government turned over the pandemic response to private profit-making corporations. Now we all see the tragedy that results when the federal government does not do the job of governing and refuses to establish a single coordinated plan. Instead, the market is in control. As a result, in America, you are on your own. The only solutions they permit are individual solutions, even though we all know we are in this together. How can we break this corporate dictatorship? Revolutionaries should be part of circles where strategic questions like these are discussed and deliberated out. Strategy goes way beyond just fighting back. It raises the question of how we can take the offensive, how we can fight and win. This question hinges on assessing what is the problem and then deliberating the answers. The League of Revolutionaries offers a strategic vision of both the central problem and its resolution. The one single thing that sustains the predatory system that is victimizing all of us is the existence of private property. Let's be clear, private property is not our own individual personal property. Personal property is the things we use individually every day, our clothes, our tools, our dwellings, the vehicles we use, our computers. Personal property must absolutely be protected. But private property is something completely different. It's the exclusive ownership of all the socially necessary tools and technologies. This means the things that we use in common, the wealth of nature, the things that make society as a whole function. Private property includes corporations, financial speculators, hedge funds, dark money, private prisons, insurance companies, water privatizers, mountaintop removal companies, and way, way more. The counter to private property is public property everywhere. The last trench of the ruling class is their defense of private property. This defense is actually their biggest weakness. The incarceration of small children by private profit-making jails cannot be morally justified. Neither can a private pipeline that hires private police to spray freezing water on water protectors who are praying peacefully. Let's think about this. Exactly how will the government justify a vaccine that's provided only to those who can afford it? Is it really okay that billionaires can go bankrupt to protect their profits? But if you have a student loan, the law says you can never go bankrupt? This gives you a sense of what that domination of private property winds up meaning. Let's take a look at climate collapse. The private corporate ownership of petroleum is the one single thing that orchestrates the destruction of our climate. As long as we allow private property to keep developing fossil fuels, there's nothing we can do. We have no option but to abolish the capitalist control of energy. Private property has massive political power. This is what you would expect in a country that declares corporations as people and money as free speech. Interestingly enough, free speech is prohibited on private property. If you want to try it and you have a job still, try telling the boss what you honestly think about him or her. We'll see how far free speech goes. Private property is why, in the face of all science, suddenly there's a push to reopen public schools today. Here's the story behind that story. Step one, unlike Europe, the government did not step in to cover the wages of every single working person. By simply refusing to act, the government creates an increasingly desperate section of people who have no choice but to work. Step two, do like New York Governor Cuomo and invite in Microsoft and Google to reimagine education. Step three, do like California Governor Gavin Newsom, also a Democrat, and decree an emergency $5 billion fund to buy Chromebooks so kids can do distance learning in Google Classrooms and other high-tech platforms. In other words, use your government to establish a $1 billion market that encourages companies to exploit it. Suddenly, what passed for public education before COVID is now delivered and controlled by big tech corporations, not by the public. Step 4, start politicizing reopening by claiming that everyone knows that opening schools is not dangerous, pretend the pandemic brings no added expenses, and claim that PPEs and testing are not so important after all. Then ensure that while the government does collect data on the spread of the virus in gyms and nail salons, there is no mechanism currently to collect data about schools at all, nowhere across the country. Step 5, most public schools are funded at the local government level, which are currently going broke in the pandemic. So refuse to support the extra expenses of local government. And then when people find out that the local police budget often approaches 50% of local government expenses, be sure to block their demands to defund the police, then call out the newly militarized police to use tactics from the Iraq war on peaceful protesters. The merger of the corporations and the state, the drive by private property to eliminate the political power of the public requires a fascist movement in order to achieve their control in what is a new economy. The job of the social fascist shock troops is to obliterate a major historical sentiment of Americans that everyone deserves equal access to the wealth of society. Once established, then the state will intervene to guarantee the dictatorship of private property completes itself. We cannot reform our way into a healthy future. The status quo is increasingly dire. Incremental piecemeal changes and so-called market solutions cannot alter the situation. We need a different strategy. The American people must have political power to heal this country and guarantee the basic necessities of life for everyone. Private property can actually be brought to an end. In 1776, the American people abolished the private property of kings and royalty. In 1865, we abolished the private property of human beings. This time around, we can finish the job. The third time is the charm. We cannot solve our economic and political problems without the public ownership of the resources of the earth, the infrastructure, the water, digital technology, and the internet. Only then can we ensure the distribution of society's wealth according to need. Private property lurks behind every single battle we must fight out simply to secure what we need to stay alive. The task of revolutionaries is to politically shape up the majority of society. The millions of people face deprivation every day or teeter on the brink of losing everything. The task is is clear. How do we win political power that we need in order to heal ourselves? This is the strategic question we need to think about. The first step in this process is to expose private property, since it prefers to lurk in the dark along with many other vermin. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, very much. Both Ethel and Steve, thank you so much. And I just want to remind speakers, we're trying to do 7-minute presentations, but we do love everything that you're saying. Okay, I'm going to ask Adam now to present his poem.
Sure, thank you. Thank you so much, Steve and Ethel, for starting us off. Give me an okay sign if the volume is good right now.
Sounds good.
Okay, great. My name is Adam Gottlieb from Chicago, and I want to start by saying that today is, I believe, a historic day in our work here in Chicago within the housing movement and the broader working class struggle and revolutionary movement that we're talking about here, because tonight we're going to have the founding convention of the Chicago Union of the Homeless, a new Chicago Union of the Homeless based on the model of the Chicago Gary Area Union of the Homeless from 1986 to 1991. And we've been working explicitly toward that goal for about a year, and more broadly for years, you know, within this struggle to house our neighbors and friends, and for many of us ourselves. It's just a day that for me is filled with awe and gratitude, and I think it's a milestone for the movement. And for me, it's obviously a personal milestone. Perhaps the most significant thing I feel I've been a part of politically in my life, and the whole journey for me politically has been completely inseparable from the League of Revolutionaries for a New America for 7 years now, and everything that I look back at that has contributed to my growth, in political education is um, is because of the League. And so I just wanted to start off with that, and uh, yeah, on that note, the poem that I'm going to share with you all is called "We Need Peace," and I actually wrote it in 2015. But my partner suggested it when we were talking about what poem to offer to this conversation today. In many ways, while the specific events of this year and this election cycle are not referenced in the poem, everything that has happened this year has just kind of distilled and clarified um, what the poem is about. And it was inspired in part by a speech that I saw on YouTube that Nelson Peary gave at a rally in Benton Harbor around 2007, I believe. And he said in that speech that a people are most easily conquered when they don't realize they are at war. This is "We Need Peace." We need peace, my people at war, but they don't even know it, so the poet's got some more to say. This is a propaganda battle coming for your brain, cause that's the war to reign. We bout to storm it, reign, cause the perfect slavery's chainless, the perfect traitor is blameless, the perfect racist ain't hatred, it's mind enslavement, the matrix. Oppression came with and stays in the USA's DNA. We got to name it to change it, but corporations are faceless. We gotta wake up the nation. Mental emancipation, collective po-education, infectious loving vibration. We need a visualization of life with no exploitation, human communication. We're talking real reparations. We want peace. What's that? That's a lot to ask. When every piece of our society is a robbery act, where violence is the normal way of life, a common fact. And then on top of that, our nature's not intact. We want peace. What's peace? Just a lack of war? What's that even mean when we know what that's actually for is just to capture more, get a high capital score so the elite keep getting richer while they tax the poor? Hey, ain't that the war? Because that's the bigger violence. And isn't the one biggest war the bigger silence? While they spout their lies to keep us all reliant, they keep closing public schools. That's more massive firings. That's war. And war is when there's folks on the street in every block holding a cup because they got nothing to eat. When there are women, children lying, dying, trying to sleep. When people keep getting beat, locked up, and killed by police. We need peace. I mean, we need a whole new game where everybody gets to eat and gets a home to stay in. We can finally distribute water, clothes, education, healthcare, and make these basic needs society's basis. That's peace. We're talking revolution now, because that seems to be the one solution. How else are we gonna feed the people who computers ousted from their food and housing? Are we human now? We want peace. That means we need justice too. That means democracy for everyone, not just a few, so we can turn our selfish culture into something new. I wonder, could you trust in me if I could trust in you? Because that's peace. And that's the overwhelming need. Not just a lack of war, actually a mental leap to finally becoming that which we were meant to be. We're talking death and rebirth. You best believe we want peace. We need peace. We want peace. We need peace. We seek peace. We breathe peace. We are peace. Peace. Thank y'all.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Wonderful. Adam, that was a great break. To Gloria, we want you on next.
Okay.
Welcome,
Hey,
Gloria.
thank you. I'm just wanting to share something with you real quick here so that you are, ooh, sorry. I don't think I'm gonna be able to do it. Anyways, I want to welcome everybody, familia. I want to share just a little bit of personal type of information. I want to tell you that I'm not an expert in any of history. I'm sure a lot of you that are participating in this call are much better than I am, but I do know and I do recognize that our country comes, just like many parts of the world, actually affected by colonialism and imperialism. I want to just give a little brief history of the United States, though, that part of the land that we're living in right now is actually part of what is stolen. Oops, still can't do it. Sorry. I'm sorry. I'm trying to share some things that I have that I want to share with you, but I can't get to it right now. But I wanted to mention that part of the, the history of the United States, really, when it started, was that there was this huge debate about slavery. And so part of people wanted to add on more land so that there would be a lot more slave states that would be part of the United States. And Texas was one of those areas where actually they even wanted to subdivide Texas into a lot of different, or maybe 6 or 7 other states, so that they can have, more power with the political machine. But okay, so right here, thank you for the tech that's showing me that part of my background being awakening, to the political situation is being part of MECHA, which is Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán, translated as Chicano Student Movement of Aztlán. So Aztlán was actually a Chicano folklore, and I'm not real certain, how accurate it is, but I know that the inclusive land was 6 entire states: California, Nevada, Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and parts of 4 other states: Wyoming, Colorado, Kansas, and Oklahoma. So we're all living on stolen land, is one of the things that I want to say. That part of that is the part of this issue was decided by a war with Mexico, the Mexican-American War, and that was back in 1846. Well, that's one of the reasons why many of us that have been involved, in the movement and the Chicano movement say that, we that we did not cross the border, that the border and now borders have crossed us. So one of the things that we know that back in the day, when I was part of this, I had an awakening, a political awakening. I had no idea in my upbringing of what all this history, was about. Now I've learned, at my 71 years of age, that, there's been always this going back and forth with regards to undocumented immigrants. And I've also, especially living in an agricultural area, that I've seen that really undocumented farm workers, everybody's always known that they've been here, but they're able to raise the money that they need to survive. They have, and still continues to this day, the remittances, money that is sent from this country back to the countries of origin, not only Mexico, but right now Central America. A lot of, there had been like an escape valve, let's say, from Mexico could not, have everybody employed. So they would come here to be employed, but underpaid and really, oppressed. So undocumented people, our immigrants, have been part of the shadows of the United States workforce for a long time, but they participated in labor. They participated in resisting. And now, what we see under the present Trump administration, one reason why this guy's got to be evicted from the White House. There is new policies that have been opened up that Trump has decided that people will wait at the border. There is no longer a line that people could come through. They are now called criminals. Really, you know, I mean, stretching the word of what a crime is. If you cross the border, I mean, with no documents, that doesn't make you a criminal. But they've convinced enough people in this United States, you know, to be against migrants, against their own class. We've seen the destruction of family. You know, right now, the most recent thing is there's been 545 kids that they don't even know where their parents are at. This is criminal. This administration is the one committing the crimes. There's a lot of things that have been done to distract all of us, you know, from what's really going on. In fact, that's why you see, you know, Blacks for Trump, or you see Latinos for Trump, because people are confused. And so we need a lot of education. We need to know about the technology surveillances that are going on. People are being killed. And right now, especially in part of COVID, you know, that we are just sending people across the border and back to their countries without really giving them the attention, the humane attention necessary. Okay, so I know Steve mentioned that fascism, which I call it, it's a war against the migrants and the poor, but it's everyone. The undocumented immigrants actually have been kept in limbo for a long time. There has been no political will, but of course they say, oh, well, you know, it's the Republicans' fault. No, it's the Democrats' fault. It's, you know, it's the fault of the parents. Anyways, there's a lot of things right now that are happening just in front of our own nose, and we don't see it. We've been learning a lot of the militarization of the border, where there are communities resisting now, not only the militarization, the drones, the surveillance, the killing of immigrants, the wall, you know, the shifting of monies to the wall. There's just a lot of things that that we need to do. You know, they call it a zero tolerance, but we need a zero tolerance of the hatred and the violence that is dividing us. There also want to get into just a little bit, I don't even know how much time I've taken, but voting and migrants. Those in power have really don't have the incentive, don't have the interest in introducing laws that would provide a path to citizenship. Like what they're doing is always changing the laws, changing the fees. And at this time, there's a backlog of about 700,000 pending naturalization applications. So there's hurdles that people have to go through to be able to become citizens and have the right to vote. But there are about 13.9 million green card holders in the United States that, you know, it's just a matter of their being ready to apply. But 700,000 are there waiting, and they're not taking action on them. There's also 10.5 million undocumented immigrants that are living here from all over the world, and an additional 6 million Americans who have been denied their right to vote due to felony convictions. Now, you know, all this stuff is man-made. This system is not only broken, it is violating human rights and destroying our families. We need a world where there is zero tolerance to homelessness, to living in poverty, to not having health care, zero tolerance of violence and the hatred that exists. We must participate in deciding our future. And it's important that we rely on each other to help each other learn some of these things from those that are involved, from those that, you know, have come from parts of history. Now, the spirit, the militant spirit that I picked up with my consciousness and awareness, you know, back as a machista, is really, it has helped me as a base, because, and my foundation is that I love people, and I am really ready to take the power from those that don't know how to run this system any longer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gloria. Wonderful. As All of these speakers have been just wonderful. Thank you so much. And again, just reminding everybody, we're trying to make time for the question and answer, but thank you so much, Gloria. It was wonderful. Next, we want Jerome. Jerome, are you
Yes,
there?
I am here.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Joyce. I really do appreciate the previous speakers. They have really turned it out. And I'm going to try to stay to the rules of 7 minutes or less. The thing that I really want to concentrate on is actually two things. One is this whole question of fascism. We'll talk a little bit about that. And the second one is its relationship to the elections and the electoral process. I think this is a very, very critical moment for all of us. It is one of the most teachable and learnable moments we've had in a very long time. You know, we get to talk about things that we've only wished we could have conversations about, like class and the role of the state and how the government is handling a major crisis like a pandemic. You know, we get to think about what it means that capitalism is in a major transition right now, and then it's confronted with these crises that it can't seem to get a handle on. And many people think, well, capitalism is something's wrong with it. No, capitalism is working exactly the way it was designed to work. It was never designed to serve people. It was always designed to serve corporations and the rich. And it's doing that. That's why it handles the pandemic the way it is. It thinks that production is more important than people's lives. The thing that I think we have to hang on to is that we do live in a class society. And at this moment, our ability to talk about class is off the rails. I mean, people realize that, yes, Trump is the point man, but he gotta have a section of the ruling class that is supporting him. And we know that we as a class is fighting for our very lives, as well as fighting for the environment, the planet, you know, for our kids and grandkids to have some place to live. You know, so we're in a major fight, but so are the ruling class. The ruling class understands, as we do, that capitalism is deteriorating, that it's going through this transition from machine-aided production, aiding labor, to actual machine production, to computers doing the major production. That is shifting everything in this society. And the result is that capitalism really can't resolve any of its crises because that major crisis is plaguing it. So their major struggle right now is how are they going to preserve a dying capitalism? How do they protect this system, given that the system has deserted its people? One section of the ruling class thinks that we should go immediately toward a fascist state. And you can see Donald Trump leading that charge. You know, but there's another section of the ruling class that thinks that the social base is not big enough yet, and we need to proceed with a little bit of caution. Those are the forces that are saying that maybe Biden might be the best choice. Now we know the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. We've had a lot of dealings with them throughout the years. We know that neither one of those parties serve us. But we also know that in our struggle to survive, we need time to get our shit together. Fascism, consolidated fascism tomorrow would be disastrous for our struggle. We might survive it, but it would be disastrous. We believe that if we could secure just a little bit more time, maybe we could organize ourselves, get our class together, make sure we spread our understanding of where this system is going, regardless of who gets elected, and be able to prepare ourselves for the onslaught of fascism. And really, our ultimate goal is to not allow fascism to come to this country. Now, many people historically have always said that fascism can't come to the United States. Well, I would like for y'all to take a little trip in history. You know, another election, 1860 was a really important election, but 1876 was also a critical election. That was the election between Hayes and Tilden that ended in the Hayes-Tilden Compromise, where the former slave-owning Democratic Party won the popular vote, but the Republican, Rutherford, they made a deal. Okay, the deal was you give the Republicans the election and we'll remove our federal troops from the South that was protecting the newly freedmen. And we all know what that resulted in: 100 years of fascist terror, lynchings and rapes and murders and all kinds of attacks, not only on Black folks, but also white folks that dared to not just support us, but to say, wait a minute, that's something wrong with that. You know, that 100 years of fascist attack went on in the United States and everybody knew it. And much of the white supremacy, which was the ideological base of that fascism, spread throughout the country and is still in place today. So fascism can and has come to the United States. Now, I believe that the two ruling parties, the Democrats and Republicans, they're united strategically with the ruling class, that we have got to move to save capitalism no matter what. I just believe that tactically they're moving in a little slower direction. And that's why when I had this conversation this week with my grandson, one of my 14 grandchildren, and he called me up. He said, look, Daddy, I know you're into this political situation. How are you going to vote this year? And I said, well, I'm a vote for Biden. I don't like Biden. I don't like the Democratic Party, but I'm gonna vote for him because I believe that we're looking at something much broader than just who gets elected to that office. We are looking at whether this country will go head on into fascism or whether we'll be given the time to defeat fascism and move on to a more cooperative society. And he said, well, that's a good argument. I hadn't heard that argument because everybody is telling me I got to vote for Biden and Biden's a good guy. Well, I don't know if Biden's okay, but the Democratic Party is not a good party. Let's remember, it was the Democratic Party in charge in the South throughout Jim Crow and fascism. They have played different roles throughout history, but one thing has been true throughout history. They have been united strategically, but they play different roles tactically. And I think that we know, and I told my grandson, I think that if you look at the bigger picture, I think you will know and your friends will know that it's in our interest to vote for the Democratic Party today. But the one thing that I told him that I think we have to remember and try to influence the rest of the world. On November 4th, we cannot let our guard down. As a matter of fact, we have got to organize harder than we've ever organized before. We have got to educate harder than we've ever educated before, and we've got to learn like we've never learned before. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jerome. Wonderful. Everybody's been great. This has been so useful. I'm going to now introduce a speaker that I didn't mention at the beginning. Kimberly Moses is a veteran labor organizer. She's a teacher and she's an essential worker here in Oakland, California. One of my heroes, Kimberly Moses.
Good afternoon, everybody. And I just want to say everybody's been great, great speakers. I just wanted to speak briefly and introduce our organization, which is the League of Revolutionaries for a New America. And we use the acronym LRNA. Who is LRNA? We're members of the working class who come from different backgrounds with different experiences. We are socially, politically, and class conscious individuals working to elevate the consciousness of our class and influence the struggle for change and transformation to a cooperative society. A society that must be based on the public ownership of the socially necessary means of production and the distribution of the social product according to need. This is revolutionary, and we are revolutionaries. How do we do this? What do League members do? Our mission is connect with and unite the scattered revolutionaries on the basis of the demands of the new class, a growing class of workers that are demanding food, quality housing, education, and healthcare. A class of workers that can no longer survive in a system of corporate private property, oppression, and destruction. Study and analysis are our tools. Education is our sword. And our direct action is to mobilize and engage the revolutionary process with the battle of ideas as we struggle in real time in the streets and workplaces and everywhere we are. How do you become a member of Learner? We invite you to join us in this struggle for change. To be a member is to accept our program, work together in the battle of ideas, and to unite around the fight for basic needs. Study and learn from one another and to help educate and unite with other revolutionaries to realize a vision to secure the future of humanity and our planet. What have I gained by being a League member? I'm going on 6 years now. The first thing that comes to mind is clarity and growing consciousness politically. The knowledge that I've gained gives me a level of discernment in my work personally and publicly. It helps me to decipher and weed out fact and fiction from the barrage of media information and disinformation that seeks to keep us confused and divided. So again, I just want to welcome everybody to this education. And this is an example of what we do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. Well done. So now we're going to go into the question and answer. And again, Jack will take us out at the end with a wonderful poem. But for right now, we're going to go into the question and answer period. And we wanted to really, we're so thankful to the presenters for both giving deep discussion for us to think about, but also giving us plenty of time to discuss questions. So I'm going to start questions, and we're going to turn this over to the tech team for a minute so the tech team can really tell everybody how they can participate and make sure that your voice is entered into the discussion. We want to make it clear, if we don't get a chance to discuss your question exactly, we're going to be doing some curation of questions. So if they're like questions, we'll put them together. But if your question doesn't get answered today, and even those that will not be finished totally, we are going to have a parking lot for those kinds of elements that come out of the discussion today, because this is a part of a series. We'll tell you when the next series in the series is coming up, but basically whatever we do today, we will capture and guarantee that we have continued discussions. So please make sure that you do participate in any way that you like to. So I'm going to turn it now over to the tech for a minute, and then I'll open to questions. Kenny, will you help us with the technical details?
Yeah, definitely. So we will be having questions and answers in the chat. You can raise your hand in the participant screen if you just click the raise hand button. Then we will also be watching the chat too. So if you don't want to raise your hand and speak, you can put your question in the chat and we'll get to your question.
And then after the question gets asked, I'm going to ask one person from the presenters to give us a short, very short, because we're really asking people to speak now about 2 minutes. And we are going to start keeping people to time just so that we hear as many voices as possible. So the presenter that I asked to speak to the question first will go, and then we'll open it up to everyone. So put also not only your questions in the chat, but also put in the chat when you would like to speak. And we do have a core of people trying to keep me honest and keep track of all of this. So we'll do our very best to make sure that you're heard. So the first question came up in the discussion earlier, and let me just find my notes here. So the main purpose of really making sure we met today was to guarantee that we address this question of, as revolutionaries, what is the urgency of defeating Trump? Obviously, Jerome spoke very directly to this, but all of the presenters spoke to this. But we want to make sure that all of us get a chance to talk about this a bit. What is the best argument for why this year we need to vote against Trump, and that would mean for Biden? What do we tell progressive friends who want change and who do not feel that they can trust the Democrats, which of course we've spoken to here? So that's the question. As revolutionaries, what is the urgency of defeating Trump? So I'm going to ask Ethel to start on that question from our presenters. Ethel?
Yes, I really do think that Jerome also touched on this so well. I think that what's kind of confusing is that we think that 25 candidates ran for the Democratic Party. And so we kind of really think that this is about which one of these characters is going to be running the place. But in reality, when we examine it, we are looking at how do we stop the formal installation of fascism as a suspense of essentially the Constitution, because we've observed throughout this year, throughout the 4 years, not just this year, the process of continuously undermining even the pretense of these norms. And I think that what this is about, this election is about if we're going to let our guard down and allow this formal installation, and if we make the wrong steps, the wrong decision, because we're focused on Joe Biden and Kamala. This right now is really about how do we stop this fascist clip control of the government and moving it forward by some of the most heinous forces in the country and globally.
You're muted, Joyce.
I apologize. So I'm now going to open it up to people, and I just want to read a related question that you may want to speak to. It's related to this main question. Why would we vote for Biden if we know from his program and his record that he's a neoliberal who only serves the capitalist class? How can we reconcile a vote for Biden with a working class program for basic needs? And what do we say to progressives looking for real change? So those were the related questions. So I'm going to open it up now to everyone. Please say if you would like to speak, put up your hand.
Oh.
Is somebody wanting to speak?
How do you put up your hand? Just put your hand up in the air?
Yep, that's fine. You want to go, Marilyn? Go.
Yeah, my kids called me too when, not only when Biden was nominated, but when Kamala Harris was nominated, AG of California. I said, we elect them so we can fight them because they represent that part of the Democratic Party that has always tied us into supporting these corporations, which we can now see are our enemies. And I think the important thing for us is not just, we're not just talking about a situation where we're making an intellectual decision about which individual to support because of our broader understanding. We are talking about being a part of a movement that's sweeping across the country. In Maryland, I was just on my Our Revolution call today. We are getting ready as soon as the Congress is elected to get Chris Holland and Ben Cardin, our right-wing senator, our liberal senators, to support the program that has come up over the last 10 and 12 years, expressed by Bernie Sanders, but expressing the needs of the broad class of working people in this country. And I will tell you, there's a Green Party person going to be elected to the city council in traditionally Democratic Baltimore. The Democratic Party's hold is slipping. It's not just the Republicans' hold that's slipping. And if we see this as, okay, are we going to be pure and support the right person? We got to be in there. I find it hard talking to these Democrats. Stop me when I hit 2 minutes, but because I know that they haven't seen a lot of this, and I know I'm going to have to go through this with them. And that's why our program says we fight side to side by the class, with the class, to do this kind of education and bring understanding. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Could I say one thing?
Yes, go ahead, Jerome.
Yeah, well, actually, two things. I lied. The first thing is that, one of the phenomena that's happening in this march toward fascism is a phenomenon that also was true under Jim Crow, the 100 years of Jim Crow. And that is that these paramilitary, used to be just Ku Klux Klans and the citizens councils, but now it's the people, the patriot people, the white supremacists. They're all joining local police forces. They're really infiltrating those police forces so that when fascism becomes the rule of the country, they are in a strategic position to make sure that those who need to be oppressed and exploited and murdered can be done so with some kind of cloak of the law. I mean, that's just another reason we got to buy some time. But that's a fact that I think we all ought to look into. The second thing that I wanted to say is that, I saw in the chat somebody saying, why should we trust Biden? We should not trust Biden. We should not trust the Democratic Party. What we should do is be mobilizing our people, our families, our friends, our communities, members of our class. We need to be mobilizing and uniting and teaching and learning now, because we have got to stop this onslaught toward fascism, and trusting the Democrats will not get it done. On November the 4th, we have got to be mobilizing people and assuring people that if we don't continue to fight for our lives and for the planet, we will all in the end lose.
Thank you so much. Tobin, you want to speak on this?
Yeah, I had a quick question. Can people hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, good. Joyce kind of touched on this here, but I have a feeling if I saw a comment that reminded me of something I'd heard repeatedly, that voting Biden gets in office, that will buy us some time. I have a feeling a lot of people in this country are going to want to relax when if that comes there, because we've been under so much tension from the last 4 years. Do you see if that happens right there, that making our work a little bit tougher to keep the momentum going, or is the deteriorating objective conditions? Do you think that will maintain at least the enthusiasm, or at least a sense of urgency that we'll see that will help us stay engaged with the people we want to contact and help?
Good additional question. Good. Yeah. Kenny. Did you want to go, Kenny?
No.
Oh, sorry. Misunderstood. Other people want to speak to this question.
This is Ethel for Stack.
Ethel, please.
I think this is a really great question. And I think that we already have great examples in what our class is actually doing. There are groupings of election protectors that exist and are meeting as we speak. They are doing things from mutual aid, passing out water in the lines, as people have been, 52 million people have voted already under just sometimes 11-hour, good old Georgia, the southernization of the nation, 11 hours to vote. And young people of good conscience have understood that these efforts have to be supported, but they're also preparing if the vote is stolen. And I think we have to, it isn't like this is a regular election, you guys. I think that's very important. And as a part of that, these are opportunities for us to politicize every step of the way of resistance that's here. And so we also have people who are, they are poised, the Sunrise Movement, many of the young people, as we say, November 4th, but they're doing it now. And I think that has to be our watchword. Do the work around basic needs now, including get that bum and his crew out of there, and understand that our goal is for government to meet the needs of the people, not the needs of corporations. So I think that to the degree that we can elevate, that is the life and death struggle that we need. That's going to help keep us on course. But I think you're totally right, Tobin. The Democratic Party is gonna, they're gonna, if there is a fight, they're gonna say, well, let the courts decide. Oh, let it, let's have some, maybe they'll do like Gore did, a gentleman agreement, and then we'll be under a fascist coup. So I think that, that's the other part of this urgency, that we can't let our guard down.
Well, thank you, Ethel. Yeah. Sarah, did you want to say some words?
Yeah. Just briefly, I mean, what Ethel touched on is we ground ourselves in these survival struggles. We always have. That's where we understand the revolution is what these objective revolutionaries who are going to die if they don't change this system. They're fighting for housing. They're fighting not to be hungry. When the one guy actually talked about automation and possibly, guaranteed annual income, it probably wouldn't have been much, but they got him off the stage fast. We understand that no matter who is president, and this is a life and death fight to get the less fascist right now, but no matter who, what are the Democrats going to do? Send us another $1,200 maybe? And people are dying, they're being evicted, they're being thrown onto the street. The homeless are being rounded up and harassed. The quality of life is just going down. People are dying and there's no national plan. Do we really think that Democrats are going to change that radically? We understand they're not. So I think it's important that we be in this fight around elections. It really is trying to slay the most dangerous instance of direct fascism. But, we're going to be able to point to the fact that people are not getting their needs met. No matter, even if Biden gets in, we hope he does. Because we really don't want a president that's just dog whistling these thugs to go, for people to be shooting each other. And this is our class out there shooting each other in the street. So I think, we have to be we have to be able to point our finger at what's really going to change. And so it's not going to be that people don't have, people have a choice whether they fight on or not. We're going to have to keep fighting till we get what we need. And we're not just dying, and they're not talking about herd immunity, which is basically just let the poor people be wiped out and died. So I could go on, but I think we've grounded ourselves in the understanding that the revolution is based in these fights for the basic needs, and that is not going to stop. It can't. So that's all.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to call on two more people, and then unless there's something really critical, I'm going to ask another question. We've got some good questions waiting, but I'm going to call on Peter and then Anthony. Peter?
Okay, thanks, Joyce. First of all, somebody just asked a question, what evidence is there that the Democratic Party in the US isn't fascist? Perhaps this is a definitions question. I think it'll help us if we understand that fascism is not just the thugs and gangs and the racist and terrorist rhetoric. Fascism has been developing in the United States economically and politically for decades. As we've seen Wall Street move into the White House, and we've seen the interests and programs of the corporations become completely integrated with the activities of the government and the state apparatus. If you look at the U.S. military, it's hugely privatized. Okay, so in many ways, fascism is well in place in the United States, and democratic regimes, including the Obama regime, have participated actively in that. But we are talking about maneuvering. We're not talking about, can we choose a better candidate right now? We're talking about a debate between a section of the bourgeoisie that is ready to openly go fascist, and change the form of the government away from democracy, and a section that says, whoa, we're not ready for that. We're not, if we do that now, then the people will be on guard and it'll accelerate their resistance. Well, it's going to no matter what. But electing someone who's on that side of the fascist debate that doesn't want to go quite so fast is in our interests. And we must and can be clear that Biden has already opposed Medicare for all. He's opposed the Green New Deal. He refuses to demilitarize the police. So we're going to put our foot up his ass right now.
Thank you, Peter. I've got Anthony and then John Slaughter after Anthony Jackson. Anthony.
Hey, so I like everybody said, I think that it's a really good question to grapple with. And I think one thing that I always go to is looking at this moment now and the young scholars and how much we are hungry to learn and are ready to engage in a movement. So I guess as you know, I'm 27 years old. I'm about to graduate with my PhD. And I say that to say, I understood the importance of making sacrifices towards an end. And I think the end has always been enlightenment and passing a torch, because I've overcome certain obstacles and barriers that some people have not had the opportunity to. And so it's our obligation to enlighten, because the intellectual tools that we have developed are not our own. Knowledge is not our own. It needs to be shared, because that's what it's for. And so it brings me to this understanding of we cannot find consciousness in a vacuum. And so here we are engaging in a collective and developing these intellectual tools even further than what the academy can give us to be able to speak truth to power. But the same forces and mechanisms that we have historically used to engage in popular education and large-scale movements cannot be the same forces that we use and engage with now. It's a new climate. And so how are we speaking to developing strategies, developing a consciousness and a vision and a strategy towards establishing a large, lasting, large-scale movement that is going to ameliorate these conditions for working class people, because we are headed to deplorable and horrible conditions for working class folks. But if people don't see their way forward, then how do we help guide them? Like, how do we cultivate a collective that's more than just of scholars that know what the struggles are, but for people that don't know? Like, how do we speak to the masses of people? I think that's something that we always have to like consider in the ways in which we engage with each other. Like, how do we speak to this moment? What tools are we developing to be able to get engaged so that other scholars that are young or other people that are on the streets that may not have understood the importance of studying and so on and so forth, how do we give them the tools so that they can be able to make their own analysis? Because you could take a horse to the river, but you can't make them drink. But if you understand the significance of nourishing yourself, then you will. How do we do that?
Thanks, Anthony. And I just want to point out that a lot of the questions Anthony's put on the table, we really need to deal with maybe as a whole separate question, this question of what tools and capabilities we have, because I think it really relates to the whole question we're meeting. I'd like to get to that and other things, but I do want to honor a couple more speakers on this point, and then we do have some great questions to move on to. So if you can hold your fire, let's let these speakers speak, and then we'll move on. So I've got John Slaughter and then Emma.
Yeah, well, just to speak to this whole question about whether or not if Trump is defeated, that the movement is somehow going to take its foot off the accelerator. I think, on November the 4th, the pandemic is not going to end. And on November the 4th, this economic devastation that's rendering millions of people in this country destitute is not going to end. And even with the defeat of Trump, this fascist movement is not going to take its foot off the accelerator. It's not going to relax. That fascist offensive is going to continue. So I think, the urgency of the moment that's brought us together here today, that is going to continue. And I think, that there's no question, but the movement, that we've been talking about here, that, it's even more urgent that we continue forward. So.
Thank you, John. Emma, have you got Austin there, or are you going to speak for us?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think whoever getting in office, they are either going to cut off, no, they're going to try to cut off Social Security and Medicare. So that on the will die. And I'm one of other people who are on disability and Social Security. And I'm not looking forward to whoever gets in office, because I know whoever gets in office, we're gonna die.
Do you need translation?
Yes, please. Would you help? Thank you, Austin.
I think that whoever gets in office is going to try to eliminate Social Security, and people with disabilities will die because they'll try to eliminate Medicare. And I am not looking forward to dying. Did I cover it?
Thank you, Emma. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for all the speakers. This was one of the main questions we wanted to make sure we had a chance to discuss. So we did spend extra time on it, but I'd like to ask the next question. And again, you know, all of this is in relationship to this moment. So please feel free, if you remember something that you really needed to say about defeating Trump, don't hold back because we've moved on. I'm going to ask this question this is again a kind of a long discussion point / question. So I can repeat it if we need to. Under global capitalism, the Mexico-US border is now a global space for the expansion of transnational capitalism. The ruling class is defending globalization, which takes us beyond national borders and to global capitalist interests. But they have to appeal to nationalism to get the support of voters. Please address this as we see that fascism is part of a global police state. How do we organize a global working class, and what is the significance of this election for global fascism and capitalism? Okay, so I'm going to, let's see. I'd like, Steve, will you try and start us off on this?
Yes, very good question. There is no doubt that the border region is this incredibly sophisticated economic and technological area. A carburetor for a car, or they don't make cars in Detroit anymore, but an SUV made in Detroit starts off in Mexico and it goes back and forth across the border about 6 times in the supply chain. So it's really a well-developed thing. It is also true, I think, that the US military budget has gone global. The US will not trade with any country that doesn't have a military budget. The police tactics we saw against George Floyd rebellions are global police tactics. They're used everywhere. And there is no doubt that the Pentagon they've openly stated that the cities of the world are the next battlefield in the oncoming war. On the other hand, that doesn't mean that we just have fascism globally. There's a difference between a police state and a fascist movement. The Guatemala has been fascist since 1954. They've killed 1/3 of their population. But they don't have a fascist movement. They just openly do that. The fascist movement, at least from what I understand, is something that's created from the top down, like by the Koch brothers and dark money, in order to create a popular rising demand to change the actual nature of the state. So for example, when Trump became president, he declared that undocumented workers are criminals. That was never done before. That's a change in the nature of the state. When homeless people are criminalized for sitting on a park bench, that's changing the nature of the state. That's changing how the police and the organs of force attack people. We don't have that we have plenty of that. In fact, the US has the biggest police state ever in the world, but we don't yet have a situation where, and this is my opinion, where we have an open fascist terroristic dictatorship. Some forces would like to get there, and we may see massacres in this country before it's over, but we still haven't got there yet in many parts of the country. What's going on in the South is another question completely at this point, but this election will tell us a lot about those steps. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Gloria, will you speak on this as well before we turn it over to everyone else?
Right. I wanted to mention too that it's not just the border where we're seeing the effects of this militarization. We know that in the books they have the 100-mile radius. Everybody right now, not just migrant, not even if you just look like me. It's all colors of people that are being stopped. It is a police state here in the United States. So it's just a matter of understanding, and we saw the the border tactical team that actually was sent to Portland, Oregon. Yeah, I think that also we haven't really talked about the effects of the electronic, era that we're living right now, that workers are no longer needed. That's why this administration, those people, the billionaires, the ruling class of this country, they don't care if you die. They don't care if you are disconnected from your family and you are being raised by someone else. But I think the main thing here is that, the basis of strengthening our movement are gonna be when the whole thing of evictions hit the fan, when people can't find work, when of course the police is going to take advantage of having more people needing to find their survival one way or other. So we're having the equality of poverty is how, it's been mentioned, that we need to try to have some understanding, like someone mentioned, that we're in this together. And I think the pandemic has kind of slowed down our participation a little bit, but we do need to continue to, touch bases with those people that are looking for that change. Thank you.
Thank you, Gloria. I'd like to open it up now to anyone who wants to speak on this point. We'll take about 5 more minutes. We've, have heard good speakers on this. Anyone want to speak on this point? Rita? Rita, do you have you want to speak? Okay, Rosemary, go ahead.
Yeah, I think, that 100-mile zone, which we have around the United States, which takes in all our major cities, most of our population, most of our universities. And, we have no rights in that zone. And the whole militarization of the border is going on. We've got countries like Hungary, which already are fascist. We've got migrants who are just shot at the border there. We've got anywhere between 50 to 300 million people throughout the world that are being forced by climate to move, mostly out of North Africa, Central America, South Asia. So we have this whole onslaught going on, and this electronic surveillance, which is worldwide, and which allows all these techniques of surveillance and, hunting people down by drones, etc. And so the global economic class is on the move. And yet nationally, people aren't made aware of what we're really up against. And they will do anything to defend their interest here. We see that. We see that. We've got people from Haiti at the border who've been forced out. We have people, indigenous people from all over the Americas. But look at the reaction in Europe. I mean, Brexit is about a backlash against immigrants. God forbid that people from the former British colonies dare to want to come to England. And the pandemic, again, we see this worldwide pandemic, and it has to be treated and addressed worldwide. The US won't participate in that. Vaccines in this country, it's going to be a competition among private companies. And they don't care if it's genocide. Herd immunity is genocide. That's what it basically comes down to. So those of us that aren't fit die, all the better for their interest. And it has to be fought at that level, just like the economic crises. And it's just total distraction. You can't play whack-a-mole with it in the States, like this state or that state, and we can't do that internationally. And that's
Thank you.
what we're up against.
Oh, sorry. Thank you, Rosemary. Thank you. Rita, did you want to go now?
Yeah. Can y'all hear me? Did I get unmuted? Oh, I guess so. Just a couple of kind of brief things. I mean, I think the question on internationalism is really important and extremely valuable, and takes us a step back in history, where it was really capitalist slavery in the United States that created global capitalism, right? So we have a special responsibility and obligation to internationalism. And I wanted to kind of swing back for a minute to some of the things Kimberly was saying earlier, because this isn't only about fighting back. It's not only about stopping fascism. It really, I think, for me anyway, is so much more about the kind of vision of a society we can actually now have, where we don't have to suffer from scarcity. We have an abundance of goods. We have an abundance of knowledge. We have an abundance of supplies. The problem is their distribution. And that's a lot of what we're talking about, to set the basis for human beings to actually begin to develop human relationships with each other, and to set the basis to actually heal the earth. And, you know, it's that vision that we actually develop in the course of this struggle through the relationships we're developing together as we wage this battle, that vision begins to emerge about what is not only possible, but is now necessary. That's it.
Thank you, Rita. Thank you so much. Listen, I want to remind people, if you're not speaking, please do mute yourselves, because we are taping this and we do want everyone to be able to hear the speakers. Thank you so much. Ethel, did you want to speak on this point?
Yeah, I think that there's an interconnection between the question that Anthony put on the table and then the specifics of this issue and the importance of this moment. So this question of the abolishment of private property is a part of, I mean, that's the key to each one of these things that we're talking about that is destroying humanity and the planet. And what is of particular note is that obviously we didn't just start thinking about this. The thing is that our class and their practical struggles, in the way that, you know, Rosemary and Gloria and others have enumerated, that is where we're at. And when we talk about politicizing every step of resistance, we're talking about exposing what are the private property interests that are operating to allow for these actions that is a block to the human pursuits for needs. I don't have to remind people, and Steve certainly said it very cogently, but I mean, when George Floyd protests developed, they were worldwide in acceptance because police kill people indiscriminately. This is a mechanism of class control. And yes, race becomes a part of a way to facilitate it. And so at the heart, we got to get at the roots of the thing, right? And so I think if we can utilize this moment where our class is asking precisely those questions, is addressing precisely these issues, I think it's so crucial. And so I think that therein lies the interrelationship between the theoretical inquiry and examination and the immediate practical resolution. Are these tremendous technological resources going to be available to address the myriad of problems that humanity is facing, or are they going to be just for the Jeff Bezos, which you name them, the handful of billionaires that essentially rule the planet at this time? So, and I think what Rita said, the construction of a new society, that's how do we flip this thing to simply defending against one or another kind of atrocity, which we must do in order to live, to the liberation of humanity. And I think that that's not simply a pipe dream. It's possible. And that's why when our class is focus, I mean, the benefit of focusing as a social force doesn't mean they're class conscious, but it means that they're moving based on what their collective needs are. We got to politicize the hell out of that.
Thank you, Ethel. I've got Steve Teixeira on Stack. I would like to have Steve speak, and then I'd like to move back to this question Anthony put on the table. We've got some related questions that'll help us, I think, get to that. So Steve Teixeira.
Yeah, this has been so rich. Thank everybody. I was looking at the chats about what would fascism mean, and more poverty, more violence, more suffering. But we got to remember what was said earlier by one of the speakers. They need a social base. They can't just impoverish every single person and beat up every single person. Someone got to do the beating, and it isn't going to be a billionaire. And so I think, in Learners Convention, we talk about this newly dispossessed section, and there's a mass of Americans who would do anything they can to avoid being newly dispossessed. If the revolutionaries get to them, they'll go that way. If the fascists get to them, and they are in a lot of places, they'll go that way. And I think while we continue to fight among the most impoverished sections, we gotta, in every city, really figure where is that section's on the border of it, on the edge of that. And some of them are conservative socially, some of them have some limitations in understanding diversity, but they understand the need to survive, and we better reach them, because we've seen the dangers. A freed slave can become a Buffalo Soldier helping take the land from Native Americans. That happened. We've seen a lot of examples of that. So we've got to fight the fight we're fighting and get ready for the fight that's coming. And if we look at the more conscious fascists, they're farther along on that road. That's one reason this asshole's president. So it's very important. It's one thing to dig into the homeless, dig into the undocumented, but you don't want to dig so deep you put yourself in a grave and you can't get out. We need a trench from which we link to the rest of our class.
Thank you so much, Steve. I've got some people on the stack. I'm going to read the next question, but I do want people to feel free to answer whatever part of these questions you want to get at. So I've got David Smogler, I've got Walda, yeah, I think those are the two I have right now. I'm going to read this question, sort of related questions maybe to what Anthony put on the table for us. This is collated sort of from different people. Okay, how do we talk to the fighters out there? What rhetoric can we use if they haven't studied revolution? What does alienation and exploitation look like to the homeless guy on the streets? How, for example, can we educate people about how war and the military buildup of the corporate class is part of an attack on us, which we must fight here and globally for humanity's and the planet's survival? And I just want to go back, Anthony, you may want to speak to this, but I think what we were trying to get at is this big question of our job as propagandists, as teachers. How is it that we speak to this new class being thrown out of capitalism and all of the related issues that go to our tasks as revolutionaries? And what tools are we building to accomplish that? Is that right, Anthony? Does that, yeah.
That is right. And I think, and again, one of the major reasons why, like, I feel like it's important to stress these intellectual tools is, and then being able to present them in a way that we're giving them to the people that need them the most. The reason why that's important is because, Trump said in the last debate, oh yeah, good, Joe. You said that's a great political response. And he said something, I think it was about climate change, that was substantive. He brought the connections between, this is not a conversation about my family and your family. This is about you. And I think that I know that when we articulate ourselves and we're pontificating, if you will, to people that don't necessarily understand the depths of what we're saying, it seems like it's too much to grapple with. And to the comment that was like, okay, well, you know, the people that are not engaged in these revolutionary talks and they don't read, and you know, Jerome always stressed the importance of reading and studying and how significant that is. And it is, but people that don't understand the value in that, like, how do you get them? How do you speak to them? How do you grab? People are drifting away. Like the working class exists as this homogenous group. We're homogenous in our relationship to capital as in its productive process as workers, but we're heterogeneous in terms of our identities. But so there's so many differences, but existing and as an entity, people are drifting away. How do we pull them back together? And when we talk about these intellectual tools, what does alienation look like to you? If I say alienation and it goes over your head, but it is something significant, and you can't collect the rainwater that falls from the sky because you're alienated from your means of subsistence, that means something to you. When you don't have clothes on your back or shoes on your feet, but you take your hat off and you get sticks from out of the woods and you try to make some beats to get people to put money in your hat in New York, and they tell you, do you have a do you have a permit to perform? Do you have a permit to perform? Then you can't do this. You can go to jail for that. They're criminalizing the working class condition. You can't even feed the homeless. How do we grab on to the people that are around us, grab on and not just in our interpersonal nuclear family or our immediate networks, but just as large-scale movements during the civil rights movements gained so much attention as Black Lives Matter is right now, how does the League of Revolutionary, how do we grab on to all of the people around us so that we can show them that when we're talking about these concepts and we're talking about how historical materialism provides an analysis of society's economic processes, its legal systems, it understands the root cause of exploitation and oppression, and it uplifts consciousness and revolution. How do we tell them that is significant to you? And how is it going to be transformative? How is it going to ignite a fire in the people around them? And it turns into something like Black Lives Matter, but something substantive where the intellectuals in the movement can then help guide. We need a conscious and a vision and a strategy towards ameliorating these conditions. We need to get out of the spot that we're in. So like Jerome said about buying us time with Biden, and how everybody said that we know that it's important to be engaged. Walter always said in these political struggles, we have to be engaged, but we have to know that this is not the end. This is a means to an end.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Anthony. I'm not trying to interrupt, except we have a great many speakers now that want to speak to your question and our question overall. So I've got, let me see, David Smokler, and then Walda, and then Laura Garcia, Sandy Perry, Adam, and Robert Kaplan. So
and add Jerome to that.
And add Jerome. So let's just try to make sure we try and get our points out. Everybody has something to say. Go ahead, David.
Yes, I just wanted to speak to this question of internationalism. I think that we shouldn't forget that there are workers who are building new societies in the world. There's workers in Venezuela, Nicaragua, and other countries that are building new societies and are following a path that makes sense for their particular circumstances to build socialism, to nationalize industries, to provide help to people. So we shouldn't think that, I don't want us to think that we're getting our asses kicked all over the, we're winning victories all over the world too. And we're part of that international struggle of the working class against the international capitalist class. I just wanted to put that on the table, that we shouldn't forget about our fellow comrades and workers in other countries. For example, we just won a huge victory in Bolivia against a fascist state. So I think we should remember those things and not feel isolated and feel interconnected with all the workers of the world that are struggling, and some of whom are winning victories. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Walda.
Yeah, I wanted to just be brief and to throw out a few things that I hope will be some threads. So this question of education, we have to be able to bridge the absolute crisis that is killing people here and globally. I mean, Nigeria is just a nightmare right now. So we have to go from that to having us understand that we are a working class that is global, because we're fighting a ruling class that is capitalism, which is global, and that we have a common enemy. I think one of the things we haven't talked that much about, though it's been implicit, is that we are fighting a common class enemy. We are in a class war. There's a common class enemy, and it is going to take unity on our part across and embracing our differences. And I think that that is a really powerful thing. And then I wanted to come back to this question of defeating Trump, the state. We need to really refocus on the question of power. To politicize is to help clarify what the path to our having power, to be able to control this abundance and its distribution. So I want to also reground us in the political struggle that we have really entered around this electoral process as one aspect of it. And I just wanted to kind of reconnect those things. And I think the intellectual tools depend on exactly where we are. But if we're not talking about what is the nature of the economy, what is the nature of our crisis, what is the nature of the planet, and the nature of how do we navigate developing the organizations and the consciousness that will give us the unity as our class to move to us having the power to resolve these problems, then I think it's important for us to frame our thinking and our actions in that kind of a framework.
Thank you, Walda. Laura Garcia, are you ready? Laura? You may be still muted. Okay, we'll come back to Laura.
Okay.
Oh.
No.
Great. There she is. Go ahead.
No, this is a really good discussion, and thank you to those that organized it. And I'm really glad that we're gonna have more of these discussions because we really do need them. But I wanted to talk about the moment. We're talking about the moment that we're living right now, and you know that this is a moment where a large section of the working class is politically active, more so than any other time. And I think it's important to recognize that. And they're active, yes, on a practical level for homes, housing. I mean, it was the same thing, homes against police brutality and so forth. But they're also, I think there is a somewhat of a recognition that they're fighting a group of people, a group of companies, a group of politicians that are not fighting for their interests. I think there is that consciousness among the millions of people. So how do we enter and participate in this struggle? And I think one thing that I've learned lately is that you enter as equals into the struggle. You enter with the understanding that we're all equals. We don't have something to give to people that, over them, over the masses. We come in and we learn from each other. They have something to teach us and we have something to teach them too. So it's an equal exchange. I really want us to get away from this thing that we're special and from the masses. No, they have a certain understanding and we have a certain understanding, and together we'll come up with the tactics that are practical in our struggle. And this is the thing that I've learned lately, working with some migrant organizations. The other thing is that I'm really glad that we're emphasizing that we're a working class that is global, that's what Walda said. And so we look at things as the immigration problem or struggle as American as apple pie, and that we look at that there is an interconnectedness and of the struggles right now. Like when you're talking about immigration rights or migrant rights, you're talking about the civil rights of those 200 million people that live within the 100-mile from the border, and their civil rights are being violated because they're being treated as undocumented. That when we're talking about the border, we're talking about the indigenous rights to the land and treaties being violated because there are nations that both in Mexico and the U.S., and so forth. So it's important to recognize that moment that we're like sort of, you can't even pull the one struggle out and say, well, this is different than this. No, we're all interconnected, and that we as equals entered into the struggle, the masses, the practical revolutionaries, and us, and we exchange what we each learn, what we each know. So that's all.
Thanks, Laura. Listen, folks, I just want to note that it's 3 minutes to the hour. And so I would like to ask people if we can continue and just have the people on the current list speak, plus then Jack letting us out with his poem, because I think this is such an important discussion. So I'm just going to keep going here, but try to keep your comments down so we can get everybody in. Sandy Perry, would you go, please?
Yes, thank you. Well, I put my hand up about 5 speakers ago, and so everybody's answered all my questions, and they raised a whole bunch of new questions, so I'll try to deal with it. But this whole question of how do we speak to people, how do revolutionaries speak to people, and I think Laura was just touching on it. I mean, the basic thing that we have to do is to get involved. If revolutionaries are not involved in these practical struggles and not involved as equals, as Laura said, we're not going to be able to talk to anybody. So we can forget about it, really. We have to engage with the people that are out there. There's a lot of people there. They're already revolutionaries because they're fighting for housing. They're fighting against this wave of evictions. They're fighting for their healthcare during a pandemic. That is a revolutionary thing that they are fighting for. And we engage with them as equals, and we learn to speak each other's language. And in the process of fighting for those, that's what the revolution, the revolution is nothing more or less than the fight for housing, for basic income, for healthcare, for the things that we all need. And the course of fighting with that, that's why we have this whole thing about defeating Trump, is because there's millions of people out there that are fighting to defeat Trump. All the people at the border who are fighting to do something about the fact that you have people living in tents on the other side of the border because they're denied asylum and they're not allowed to be in the United States while they're applying for asylum, and they're barely surviving. All the people that are being called Antifa because they're fighting for justice for Black lives, and being called Antifa and threatened with 10 years imprisonment or murder. It happened to that guy up in, I think he was up in Washington or something. All the people that are fighting on the Supreme Court because they believe in voting rights, and they keep putting fascists on the Supreme Court who are denying our voting rights. We revolutionaries are involved in those things. And through this exchange of ideas and through the twists and turns of that battle, we learn how to talk to each other, new revolutionaries and old revolutionaries. We have to educate each other how to talk to each other, and also how to what direction we go in, how we move forward. Everybody's been talking about not trusting the Democrats, and we don't trust the Democrats, but that has to be learned. That has to be taught to some of the people that are fighting inside the Democratic Party. All of those are the lessons that we need to teach each other. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Thank you so much, Sandy. Adam.
Word. What a great conversation, y'all. Just so rich, as everyone has said. So what can I add briefly? You know, I think a lot about pedagogy, and I think our conversation is you know, about pedagogy right now in a big way. Lerna teaches that we can only do our work as revolutionaries from inside the struggle, that we do our propaganda from inside the struggle, and that our propaganda is essentially education. It's there, we can use those terms almost interchangeably, that what we mean by propagandize is actually teach. And as Laura pointed out, there actually is no such thing as teaching without learning in real time. You know, it's about relationships. And so that's what it really means to be inside the struggle. And we talked about this in our Chicago discussions weekly just recently, that, you know, it's about building relationships. And what does that mean? That means having accountability to each other. It means having shared risks, you know, and from that, we become a part of the developing organizations. Organizations could look like anything. Some of them will be formal organizations. Some of them will be informal. Every tent city is essentially a revolutionary organization. And our job is to, you know, swim in the sea of revolution that's all around us, you know, and to help articulate with the people, to speak with the people. And as Sandy said, in the process, we learn to speak each other's language. And that's 2 minutes. I was timing myself. I'll just say, yeah, okay, I'll just leave it there. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, Adam. Robert Copland, will you please join us? Robert?
The biggest problem I think we have is all these organizations are working in silos, whereas the housing advocates, the homeless advocates, the healthcare advocates, the environmental, we got to get them all together as one big force. And I'm done.
Thank you so much. And we saw that you made a lot of comments in the chat if people want to check out a lot of the comments that Robert made. Jerome, would you go, please?
Yeah. Like a lot of people have said what I wanted to concentrate on. So I'll just say that in my dealings with people over the years, the one thing that I have to remember, and we should all remember, is that we're in a long-term struggle. What that means to me is that not only do you have to build relationships, and you have to take people where they are, you know, and try to move the process forward from that point, not where you think they should be, but where they are. And you also got to realize, we have to realize that people know a lot more than they think they know, and a lot more, many times, than we think they know. You know, so we do have to be open to make sure that we are learners as we are trying to be teachers. But the other thing that I think we haven't said that is important is that since we're in this a long-term struggle, these relationships, we should not burn any bridges that are not necessary to be burned. Some you have to burn. But what I've learned in my experience is that sometimes I have this great relationship with people in the struggle, and then we part ways. Well, many of those relationships that I had 5 years ago, people are now calling me back and saying, Jerome, we need to talk. You know, and that's because I didn't burn the bridge. And that's because I knew I could learn something from them and they could learn something from me. So, you know, let's not burn bridges, let's build relationships, and let's talk to people like they know something, and let's meet them where they are. That's the way to talk to people and get them involved. Not get them involved because they're already involved, but try to move their involvement from one level to the next. We're all in this struggle trying to build class consciousness, and this is a moment that we can make great advancements with class consciousness. And so that's one of the areas that I think we should be concentrating on.
Thanks so much, Jerome. Lou, would you go, please? Lou, you may be muted still.
Not any longer.
All right.
Just a couple of things, because again, everybody has pretty much said in the last round what I wanted to say. I want to touch on the fact that that we are in a moment that most of us have never lived through. That this is an opportunity that nobody has ever had, that we have in our country. The kinds of uprisings that we've seen, the kinds of flashes of consciousness that we've seen. And this really requires that we pay very close attention, like Jerome was saying in this last comment, to the fact that people know a lot more than we sometimes give them credit for. And they can obviously teach us a lot more. And this goes for wherever we are involved. I think the most important thing that I want to take away from this discussion today is this last section that people have been talking about, the hows. How do we approach people? How do we conduct our work? How do we get to the next step because we more or less have a common agreement about where we are, but we really need deep discussions about the hows. And I think we've begun to do that here in a way that could be very, very productive. And I'm done.
Thank you so much. Listen, folks, I really appreciate all the discussion. I think we're going to have to end here. What I'd like to do, though, is just make sure before we hear Jack that we understand there will be a follow-up, not follow-up, but another in a series of these political discussions, as well as an increasing number of opportunities that we're trying to organize to reach each other with education. So I'd like to first just make sure that Ethel, will you just speak quickly about or Sandy, about the next event that we will be hosting?
Sorry, I'm trying to actually put the flyer up. If Kenny and I have managed to. Oh, thank you. All right. So the next discussion, we call them dialogues here, is going to have a particular focus more on the emphasize with the leaders on various fronts of struggle. That we then as learner, it will be learner sponsored, but it will also particularly focus on the contribution of proletarian women to different parts of this process, but including hopefully we'll have guests who have run for office here in California on the program of basic needs. The date is November 14th. Please put it on your calendar as a save the date. And the time is to be announced because
that's right. Me too.
Please put yourself on mute, please. Go ahead, Ethel, sorry.
Time we are having to leave open because if there are in fact protests and demonstrations, we don't want to conflict. We want some of those leaders at the meeting. So it won't be of the same caliber where this is largely obviously about the political moment and education. This will be engaging some of those leaders, as many as we can possibly, and discussing which way forward. And so again, people will get these as soon as our collective finalizes it on Monday, but we wanted to make sure that people got this on their screen and on their calendars for November 14th. And then again, it'll be sponsored by the National Basic Needs Electoral Task Force. Thank you.
Thank you, Ethel. And we will be contacting people, particularly if you want any particular information. Do put your name in the chat with what you would like to receive. We know that people should understand they have access to the Rally Comrades newspaper online, and we have a welcome pamphlet for anyone who would like to receive that has our program in it. So please feel free to, we will be contacting people with more information, but please feel free to ask for that. So I'd like now to close out by having Jack take us away. Jack?
Yeah.
Yay.
Okay. A lovely discussion all day. I'm going to read a poem that I wrote and was published by Bottle of Smoke Press in 2017. It's called The Coup de Con Arcane. That is COUPDECON. Arcane is the name for my little longer poems. This is in 2 parts. 1. No, this Dada isn't a narc-crow hymn to Donald the Trump. In the midst of the 100-year bistroversary of the mating between Lenin and Sarah at the dawn of the epic of technology and the tittle mabelization of the war to end all whores, when Vladimir said to Tristan, listen, Romaniac, you're just an artsy czar, and we're finished with czardom. Next year, our Bolshevikis are going to make the world safer for children to run around in. Thus heardeth Sarah Thustra, the theme of this hope-feely, provocative, evocative graffiti of an hurricane swirling a centennial later in a synchrony of simony, usury, timony martunis, and from the second we ruled war through our career in military warfare, vi et Grenades gulfing down Nicaragua, penetrating Libya, the dopiated Talibans of Afghanistan with an Iraq blindness, and now with the hobby-hersical Dada ride of doom-all Trump and the royal flush of his toilet mouth of lies and trumpery, we found, lo and behold, that he's committed the evilest of all Dada's evils, an evil that, when read backward, doesn't say live, but die. Trump has made children afraid, scared as no other president has ever. 2. Oh, your coup de con is finished even before it's begun, Domox. With a pickaxe Vienna holds him back with hearts felt in a hardy field of kids, waking to the song the world is going to drown you out with, to drown you in for having made children all over the world tremble in fear. There can be no dapple talk now, no apologies for that. That can only be your resignation, literally, your disappearance totally. Other ways, the kids themselves will mock it very plain to you. They control the armed forces, not you, the cynics, the house of rapper sensitives, not you. Fire and police departments will listen to the children, not to you. You're right. America will be great, but not with you. By you, we will not be ruled. From Katrina Fornia to now you're kaput, man. By you, we will not be ruled.
Thank you so much, Jack. Well done, everyone. With this is Joyce Mills from Oakland. I'm going to close the meeting and we look forward to future events. Thank you so much, everyone. Goodbye.
Thank you, Joyce. You did a great job.
Yeah,
Yep,
you did,
you
Joyce.
did. Bravo, Joyce.
Wonderful, bravo, bravo.
Good job, Joyce.
Oh, bye, everyone.
Great,
Bye.
great leadership.
All right.
Well done.
Thanks for the tech people.
Yes.
Yes,
Thank you all. Great work.
Wow.